we have really radical, like basically Nazism on the ascendant. We have really radical socialism on the ascendant.
Young people are attracted to kind of extremist ideologies because they promise that things could be way different and way better. Do you think there's any examples of like really big liberal ideas that we could use to inspire people and attract them to liberalism?
No, you have to do the homework and you have to understand what the is going on. The issue right now is that we're in a society where we have largely solved a lot of simple problems, okay? We typically don't lynch black people. We don't send gay people to conversion therapy. Women are allowed to vote and go to school. Like a lot of the very simple stuff we've more or less solved or we've made a progress on. So now the questions that are before us are far more complicated and they require a more complicated answer. You're taking a guy, you know, who's in the year 1920 who weighs 400 pounds and he's expecting an Ozempic when what he needs is 2 years of like diet and exercise. When you talk about fixing problems in like say like the black community, the answer is
welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Project Liberal podcast. My name's Josh Eckel. I am your host, the president of Project Liberal. I'm joined today by Micah Irfan from our steering committee. Hello, Micah.
Hey guys.
Thanks for taking the time to join me. And today we're joined by somebody who I'm a huge fan of, who I've been watching for years, who's a commentator, he's a streamer, Stephen Bennell, aka Destiny. Destiny, thanks for taking the time to chat with us, man.
yeah, thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. So today we wanted to talk about a variety of topics, many of which that you've talked about publicly. I was going to maybe kick us off with just some of the summaries, then hand it over to Micah to maybe drill into the specifics. So we want to talk a little bit about leftism versus liberalism, the difference between those two ideologies. We want to talk a bit about some of the stuff that came out of the Tenet indictment, Russian influence in our elections, and then close it off with kind of the downfall of the Republican Party, January 6th, and kind of the trajectory right now of the American right. But to kick us off, I was going to hand it off to Micah to maybe frame things, and then we can kind of go into the conversation.
Right. So a lot of the work that we do at Project Liberal is about trying to recapture the liberal identity in the United States. We feel like it's been forgotten, and there's a lot of a conflation between liberalism and progressivism. So the first question we had for you is, what does liberalism mean to you, and how is it differentiated from leftist ideologies?
I guess liberalism is like very broadly like kind of oh God, the truth is the answer to that question really depends on who I'm talking to. But I mean, I would say that a broad defense of liberalism is a broad defense of classical liberal values, like things like freedom of speech, right to private property, democracy. These types of things I think are very, very broadly like your defenses of liberalism. Obviously, these play out a little bit differently depending on which country you're in. I would think that the difference between liberalism and leftists probably have a lot to do with your tolerance for different opinions. In a liberal society, you tend to tolerate a pretty wide array of different political opinions. I think in anti-liberal societies or illiberal societies, like in a leftist or like a communist or socialist society, oftentimes these might be, I guess, like Vietnam or China, where it's a single political party and no alternatives are allowed. The deployment of private capital is either explicitly banned or it's like heavily regulated or controlled by the government. The government might have ownership or say in terms of like how things are actually, ran itself, like ownership in businesses and then saying how those businesses are run. But I would say on a very broad level, I would say that these are the big differences, but then obviously the specifics can play out differently depending on what we're talking about. Yeah.
Right. It's like individual freedom, skepticism of using coercive force against others. Of course, it's not completely dogmatic and extreme, but
what's not dogmatic or extreme?
Liberals are not completely dogmatic.
I am dogmatic, and we should be more dogmatic about liberalism. I think we need to be way more ardent in defending liberalism and in espousing the importances of liberalism and the good things that liberalism has done. And we need to be way less tolerant of the insane people, especially in this country, but around the world, that are incredibly illiberal and want to threaten or attack, I guess, like kind of that liberal order.
Yeah, I'll actually chime in on that because that's one of the things that I've appreciated about the way you approach these conversations. Now, I typically don't maybe go as dogmatic as you might do. You might have gone in some ways, but I'll throw it this way. I feel like right now the values among young people are like we have really radical like basically Nazism on the ascendant. We have really radical socialism on the ascendant. And it feels to me like liberals kind of have this very, I don't know, they tend to kind of approach things in a lot of the times in a very academic way or in a very, skeptical way. And they have a hard time like really fighting for their values. Right. And obviously liberalism is the reason why society's been as prosperous and free as it's been. It's like the dominant force in American society. I feel like liberals kind of have forgotten how to argue in favor of their values.
Yeah, I think liberalism is really good at kind of hosting its own criticisms, which is fine. It's also good at absorbing its own criticisms too. But yeah, I think sometimes we kind of forget that liberalism is a good thing, and it's okay to be proud of your country and be proud of your political organization, and you don't have to hate your country and hate yourself and everything all the time. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of liberals are like kind of caught in this whole like evidence-based ism, pragmatism, kind of this moderate politics. And they don't talk about kind of the informing values which kind of structure our view of the world. And I mean, you know this very well. Politics is not based on array of specific policy views. It's based on certain broad narratives, right? The right wingers talk about how the immigrants are destroying us and the foreign countries are taking advantage of us and the deep state. And the left talks about the ruling capitalist class, which is to blame for at least a lot of our problems. And like, I feel like it's so important for us to tell our own story of politics. Now, this is on the agenda, but I am curious. What would you say like the most simple liberal story of politics would look like?
Oh, the liberals beat the Nazis and the Soviets in the Cold War, okay? I don't know. I think that liberalism has done a really good job at becoming this kind of world culture. And it's this thing that can absorb and adapt to so many different people, so many different ideas, so many different types of businesses, so many different cultures. Like, in a way, liberalism has kind of become so ubiquitous across the world that it's almost like disappeared, right? And that people can't see it, and they take for granted, I think, some of the benefits of it. But I remember arguing, in the Fresh and Fit studio that, as much as you guys are simping for, the Emiratis or whatever other weird country you want to simp for, like there's a Haitian immigrant or a descendant of Haitian immigrants. I'm descendant of Cuban immigrants. Myron's descendant of Sudanese immigrants. Like all of us are here in a studio, on Miami Beach, like shouting at each other on the internet, thanks to an American business that is hosting all of this. Like this is a really unique, cool, special thing that I'm not sure if at many other points in human history, something like this or the opportunities like this have existed. And this is in part due to, or not in part, but almost solely due to liberal values or liberal ideas.
Well said. So, okay, so then let me dig in a little bit to the broader topic around liberalism versus leftism. So that is the thing that we have, we often combat is the kind of confusion between those things. I think, I've done a lot of travel overseas, and it seems to me like liberalism, at least in Europe, has a distinct identity, right? It's distinctly different than these like far left ideologies, but there's all these kind of confusion around that. So we talked about how socialism and kind of these radical ideas can kind of get ascended among young people. Like, do you feel like do you have any thoughts on maybe where you feel like socialists might go wrong, and where they are absolutely in contradiction with liberal values?
Narratively, I would say it's like the demonization of wealth and success, and the demonization of every liberal country. That like they're the most racist, they're the most evil, and they have to be criticized more than anybody else, and all this or whatever. I think that that's really bad on kind of like a narrative level. I think on a policy level, it depends really on how far left you go, because you get, from tankies that would, do a single party rule and killing everybody that disagrees, all the way up to kind of like fake socialists like Vosh, I think calls himself like a market socialist, where they basically just want
libertarian socialists,
or they just want like a little bit more like welfare, which is not really socialism, but I guess today kind of people say that. On a policy level, I think people who want to ban private capital, people want to ban private ownership, people want to ban, the ability for companies to exist independent of the government, or ban, people's rights to own capital. I think that's a pretty stark policy contradiction, yeah.
Right, and I think there's like their meta narrative is basically that the bourgeoisie, the ruling class, is the cause of all of our problems, and they're the thing that leads to the government making bad decisions. And so every time you point to the government to maybe being incompetent or bad at doing something, they say, well, that's because capitalists exist. I think it's such an interesting talking point, because I feel like we have so many examples where that's not the case, right? Like with housing, NIMBYs, they're local, they're usually old ladies, right? They're like, it's the developers that are on the opposite side. Like you might know, do you know the Jones and Dredge Act? I mean, these terrible protectionist measures we have all over the place, which increase shipping costs. They destroy the economy of Puerto Rico, raise costs for Hawaiian families by thousands of dollars. And it hurts most capitalists, right? Do you think that there is a way we can make kind of these more wonky ideas that a lot of like liberal academics have talked about more accessible to people?
Maybe my mind's not there at all right now. Unfortunately, I think the number one issue, I think it's like an existential threat that we're facing right now, are people like Candace Owens and Tim Pool. I think that our we exist in completely and fundamentally separate realities right now. We can't even begin to have conversations about policy, because any conversation about a policy starts with a realization of what's actually happening around you. And half of this country right now, at least, lives in a totally different world. So how do you even begin to have that conversation? Like, how can I talk to you about reforms maybe for the FDA when you believe that the FDA is controlled by Fauci and Bill Gates to do gain of function research to shove, bad vaccines into your children and make them autistic? Like we can't have a conversation. There's no talking to be done there.
Right.
Right. Yeah, go for it, Micah. Go for it.
Okay. A connected point to this is, you talk about like how our politics is fundamentally broken. You see all these right-wing extremists advance and win their primaries and be given this huge platform. And of course, the entire Republican Party apparatus echoes their narratives. Like Trump made the entire Republican Party protectionist and nationalist and populist since 2016. Do you think that there's a certain series of institutional reforms, maybe like changing our voting system, changing our primary system, maybe changing campaign finance laws that we need to pursue to maybe structurally fix the brokenness at the heart of our politics?
There are probably some things I would be in favor of, some reforms. The issue, I think, sometimes is people, like, you can't make any system foolproof. Like, at the end of the day, dictatorships can have bad dictators, democracies can have bad voters. If your population is fucked, no amount of structural reform is going to save you from that fuckedness. There are some things I think that would help. I feel I'm a big fan of Supreme Court term limits, just because it makes it so the like one president gets one Supreme Court nomination or something, or one term is one nomination. I think that would be really healthy. There's probably other things I would see done, maybe like that interstate compact for voting, or whatever the fuck they call it. The idea that the popular vote maybe might determine the president, that might be probably something I'd be okay with. Maybe adding more representatives to the House, I think, are things I'd be okay with. I think right now there's way too much like government institutional DEI for conservatives, and I think most of that needs to be stripped the fuck away immediately. They've abused it and basically shit on that good faith, that institutional advantage they've had for way too long, and I think they need to pay more political prices for how unpopular and insane they are. So I think that a good place to start is by getting rid of all of the basically like affirmative action that they have in the House of Representatives and with the Electoral College, and they can keep the Senate as fine.
The thing that I'm concerned about, and I couldn't agree more with many of the things that you laid out, the thing that really concerns me goes back to what you discussed about truth, because there's no real way we're going to achieve broad-based, serious, systematic reforms to our democratic systems until we can kind of build consensus around those things. And when we're operating in two different realities, like two different, not only political realities, but like truth, we have completely, like as you mentioned, Tim Pool, the reality they're living in is completely based on falsehoods. Like, do you think there's any way to tackle that? I mean, before you joined the studio, we were talking about this idea of like AI community notes, right? Things like, is there any way that you think institutionally we can pull ourselves back to truth? I mean, are we just going to be living in a post-truth world?
I mean, institutionally, it's really hard. This is more of a cultural thing, but one of the scary things is now one of the biggest bad actors that has their fingers on the cultural levers is Elon Musk, who is also anti-liberal and lives in an insane fucking fantasy world. And now he controls one of the largest social media platforms on the internet for news. There is no way to institutionally get around that. So yeah, we haven't really seen like a social media company actually be what conservatives accuse them of being before, which is when you have a huge social media company that's controlled by an avowed outward partisan who is openly and blatantly supporting one candidate, and then amplifying voices that are attacking one political party on a platform like we've seen with Elon and X.
Right, right. And it's a real challenge too, especially it looks like Mark Zuckerberg might be joining him in the crazy house. Who knows whether we're freaking out a little bit prematurely. But it does seem to me that like there probably has to be some sort of institutional answer here. I mean, it seems like Twitter's a particularly bad example, but our social media algorithms are amplifying the problem. And I know a lot of people have called for social media regulation. I imagine we'd all agree that I'm not very optimistic about its prospects. I suppose I'm confident in the free market to offer alternative social media arrangements. And maybe that's an example of the liberal thought process where I think very frequently people look to the government to save them. They look at a problem of a free society and they say, the government needs to solve this. And often liberals have said, well, why can't we form our own social institutions that could solve this problem ourselves?
1 second, I ate a piece of bread. You were supposed to chime in with something there, so I wasn't awkwardly silent.
No
Fuck
worries.
you. No, that's okay. thinking that the free market will solve the misinformation problem, I think is akin to thinking that like socialism or communism can do like a command economy and solve every problem. At the end of the day, firms optimize for revenue, and revenue is usually by delivering a product that people want. And people have this huge disconnect. They have this big bad assumption that human beings are like these truth-desiring, truth-seeking creatures. And we're not. We just like things that usually make us feel good or provide us some level of comfort, or things that can reinforce a narrative or whatever. Or that does those are the prior two things I mentioned. The free market will only deliver systems that are increasingly good at that. The idea that expecting the free market to deliver some type of like system that prioritizes truth or fact is just, there's no reason why it should. It doesn't happen.
Well, yeah, unless people wanted it.
Yeah,
right?
which they clearly don't. Right. So, yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have had the exact same thought that you, and it's actually very concerning for me because when I look at, I think you're actually touching on something that I don't have an answer to whatsoever. When you're looking at like what market incentives are pulling people to, they're pulling people towards misinformation, right? And so in this case, a liberal solution is not apparent to me. I know that there is likely a solution to this, and we need to find a solution. Otherwise, we're going to be fucked as a society and a civilization. But I don't necessarily know exactly what that solution is. And I do think anecdotally that there could be, market-based solutions if we're dealing with good actors. Like, as we mentioned, like there, as despite the fact that Elon Musk is incredibly illiberal, the community notes function I think has actually been a pretty damn good function, and he's gotten fact-checked a couple times. Now, the answer is not clear to me.
Well, let me hop in with
the
some
problem even
solutions.
is just on that. The issue though is that because conservatives are so divorced from reality at this point, they're able to effectively incorporate every criticism as a furtherance of the conspiracy that they live in. Like, right. If you go to a conservative, you talk to them and say, wait, well, I know this is bullshit. Then you go like, how do you know this is bullshit? It's like, well, it was literally fact check. The fact checkers? Those are all liberal bias. Snopes is just liberal bias, right? Fact check, that's like a liberal tool. That's like a liberal bias. Like they don't believe things called fact checking anymore. They don't believe in that. They have their own world. I don't know.
Right. And it's unfortunate. All radical ideologies seem to do the same thing. I mean, Marxist-Leninists talk about like hegemony, capitalist hegemony, which makes the Soviet Union look bad. Ultimately, it's a problem that has to be solved. And it doesn't seem like the government will solve it. It seems like in order for the government to solve it, the public would have to be convinced to demand the government solve it, which seems also very unlikely itself. Now, I'm optimistic about something called the Fediverse. Right now, social media is naturally monopolistic because of network effects. Why do I not leave Twitter? Because all my friends are on Twitter. I don't want to lose my followers, right? But I don't like how Twitter is. Threads sort of maybe join this. It's kind of like what Mastodon is. Social media could become a user interface that allows you to connect to something bigger, just like Chrome allows you to connect to the internet. And that could allow people to freely change social media sites while carrying their followers with them and still being able to see posts on other sites. Does that solve every problem? No, because people would still have to move to the better platforms. But I'm somewhat optimistic about that prospect. Do you think that it's like even possible that we could convince people to like demand better and move to better kinds of social media firms?
No, because I think that one of the big problems you have right now is people have this assumption that every single person is the same in terms of their engagement with reality right now. So anytime you push in a direction where you're punishing like a bad thing that's not tied inherently to a political party, conservatives will always accuse you of being heavily biased and they won't participate. Like if you try to say like, okay guys, for today, we're just going to make it so that on this platform, you're not allowed to say any verifiably untrue statements about whatever topic. Conservatives are all going to rise up and say you're biased because they're going to be the ones getting hit the most. And they're just going to cry about it. And they're going to say, oh, this is all liberal bias, right? We can't say that that fucking Fauci made $700 billion off the vaccine that, killed my child. Like, fuck you. Obviously, this is a liberal platform, right? And you're like, oh, well, fuck us, I guess. And then you could play into what the media unfortunately has done, even the left has done over the past 8 years, like the liberal media, in that you try to hold both sides accountable like they're the same. But then that just lets conservatives be increasingly delusional because they don't actually give a about any criticisms coming from the left ever, because they're authoritarians, right? So why the would you care about the people that you want to subjugate, right? So nothing that you say matters to them. And then when you the left obviously cares, right? Like the conservative media can attack Trump all day. Trump's never stepping down because the liberal media attacked Biden. Biden stepped down in how long was it after the debate? A week or two? Like, yeah. So it's like, it's not even close to it's just, You can't live in worlds where you have such dramatically different standards. It's not functional. And there's no moral and there's no good and there's no effective way to navigate that world. So the first thing you have to do is aggressively even up the standards, because you can't exist in a world where your opponent is allowed to fart in an elevator next to you and then tell you that you did it. Like, you can't live in that world.
What does it look like to up the standards? When you say that, you mean like really be radical, like call out the bullshit unabashedly? Is that kind of the model that you're saying?
Yeah,
like,
there needs to be more
corporately?
unabashed, like hardcore, like when you're in a conversation with a conservative, like they need to admit some things up fucking front. For me right now, obviously it's the J6 stuff, but it should be more too. Like, hey, didn't you say we were all supposed to have vaccine passports right now? Or, oh, hey, didn't you say that COVID was a giant hoax? Oh, hey, didn't you say that there were supposed to be massive like deaths from vaccine injuries? Or, oh, hey, didn't you say that we were gonna like give all of our money to Ukraine and go bankrupt? Or, oh, hey, weren't we supposed to have communism after 8 years of Obama? Hey, weren't we supposed to have communism after 4 years of Biden? Or, hey, didn't you say the DOJ was corrupt? Why do we have a conviction on Hunter Biden? Why do we have the New York mayor or whatever? Like, hey, there's no accountability for any of these things ever. Meanwhile, these guys will say, what about when that guy wiped Hillary's email server?
Yeah. No. I think you're completely correct. Okay, well then why don't we, because I do want to talk a bit about the left, but actually one of the things I'll say is that I actually just, went on a show with some social democrats and talked to them about this thing. I think in this political moment, despite the issues that liberals might have with the left, we're in a moment right now where we need to kind of fight to defend liberal institutions.
Oh, absolutely.
So I think absolutely the biggest threat to liberal institutions right now is MAGA authoritarianism. It's dominating the Republican Party. It's a big issue. I do want to come back to that, but maybe we could talk a bit about Tenet and about Russian influence, because let me just frame this a little bit for you, Stephen, so that you can I fill you in a little, like kind of where I'm coming from. I was kind of spent like 10 years in the libertarian movement. Okay, there have been articles that have come out, and I don't use the word libertarian anymore. I use the word classical liberal. I just use the word liberal actually to define my viewpoint. I think I watched the libertarian movement get like totally co-opted by like pro-MAGA groups a couple years ago. I have read articles that have alleged that like Ron Paul's entire 2012 campaign was like astroturfed by Russia, and then now we've got all these stories about the DOJ, not stories, this indictment, this Tenet indictment from the DOJ, basically saying that Lauren Chen was like giving money from the Russian government in order to boost Russian narratives. So how much do you think these MAGA narratives are like astroturfed, and this red pill movement is astroturfed? And like, just do you have any like broad thoughts on that, on like why it's so ascendant right now in society?
People need to stop seeing these as dichotomies, and they need to see them as like multiplicative or additive or whatever, right? People sometimes will come in and they'll say, is that movement astroturfed, or is that like legitimate belief? No. You astroturf to create the legitimate belief. Both things are happening simultaneously. I think that a lot of the MAGA stuff, especially, I mean, like you look like the trans boxer shit, or basically any like big culture wars thing, which we saw from the Mueller indictments, from the Russian investigation, where Mueller showed, by the way, that Trump's campaign was colluding with people in Russia. You saw that how Russia operates these accounts, how they push on these social issues in order to divide us on these like particular topics. A lot of it can be astroturfed and pushed, but then once it's astroturfed, conservatives, since their mind is so ripe for intellectual rape, okay, since you can mind so easily, they take to these narratives and then they legitimately go out into the world and then they propagate it, like it was told to them by their great-great-great-grandfather. So yeah, I think a lot of it begins astroturfed, but conservatives are just so easy to yank the chain on, and then they'll chase it like a cat going after a laser pointer down the hallway. They'll just run as hard and as fast as they can towards it. So it might have started off astroturf, but a lot of it is legitimate now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely correct. I mean, you see like all these like right-wing nationalist populist groups which came about, and like very quickly you've seen, like, look at TPUSA, what's their catchphrase? Free markets, limited government, like individual liberty. Like, is that visible in any of their rhetoric? I don't know if it was before, but it certainly isn't now. Charlie Kirk never even says the words free markets anymore. He talks about tariffs, and he talks about all these social cultural issues, and it seems like, the Trump movement created just a couple talking heads like Tucker Carlson, and very quickly all these people just flipped on a dime. You see Vivek Ramaswamy trying to, tie the bow and connect it. He says, and JD Vance says the same stuff, which is, whenever times are good, yeah, we can have freedom, but times are bad now. And so now we can't afford actually all this freedom stuff. Yeah. We need the state to support us in this war, fight for our very existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super cringe that It's like when you think of like history books and you read it, you're like, how do these fucking idiots like fall for Hitler? Like, LOL, how stupid must the Germans have been? And then like you look at Donald Trump and he's like, the media is the enemy of the people, and it's like, oh, well,
Yeah, that's
like
right.
it's like the most fashy 101 type of statement you could ever make. Like, Jesus, that's a pretty extreme thing for the president of the United States to say. I'm going to sue all the media so they can't criticize me. Okay, that's kind of weird. Yeah, it's just it's beyond like ridicule. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's honestly really shocking to me to watch. I mean, I guess it I, it's very disturbing to me to watch the mainstreaming of authoritarianism and then just see it regurgitated. The thing that blows me away is like I see it regurgitated. To your point about things being astroturf, like then breaking into the national consciousness and like being part of just everyday discourse for decades. Like I have family members I interact with that are repeating these narratives that are completely like well-meaning people that just read these things online. Like they get caught into these kind of like pipelines, and then it is just part of the dominant discourse. And I've heard these things for years, and they get more and more and more and more radical and more and more and more authoritarian. It's very, very concerning. Do you feel like a lot of this stuff on the right, like I mean, the engagement numbers that these people are getting is crazy. Do you think that, I mean, I have an assumption about this, and I'm going to assume where you might go with this, but like this Russian money, this whole nexus of Russian money, I mean, this has got to be a bigger machine and a bigger infrastructure than what's come out with this DOJ. And
Well, it is. Didn't they say in another release in that and the was it an FBI? Not a report, not an affidavit. Well, they put out something, but they said there were like 600 influencer operations in the U.S. that they'd identified up to that point, right? Where they haven't named them yet. So yeah, I mean it's not surprising at all. But
okay, why don't we talk about January 6th, Mikey? You got something?
Yeah, let's transition to January 6th. I think it's directly related to this. Speaking of relatives, talking to so many people that refuse to acknowledge that Trump tried to overturn the last election, or alternatively refuse to acknowledge that it's very clear it was not stolen. What would you say? Like, what is your go-to pitch whenever you speak to like kind of that standard, like well-meaning family member who just doesn't get it?
catch you on the other side of the Civil War. I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, it's delusional. Yeah. The fact that, like, you want the left to take ownership over, like, some random pet project or some, you know, trans person who shouldn't have been trans, and you guys are responsible for this and blah, blah, but they won't even acknowledge, like, the reality of what's happened in past events. It's like, this is fucking, it's a joke. It's an actual fucking joke.
Right. Right. I mean, I suppose the evidence is just in the court cases, right? I mean, that's what I always point to. It's like, well, you know, you lose they come out like every week and they're like undeniable evidence.
The problem is that none of them believe this. Don't stop fucking doing that. Don't do that. You're doing it and Pisco does it and everybody does it. Stop pretending like they're making real arguments. They're not. It's that Voltaire quote or whatever where they delight in like playful argument. They don't give a about any of this, right? A conservative will tell you, oh, you can indict a ham sandwich, okay? Oh, a conviction? Yeah, well, the courts are rigged. And then they'll come out and they'll show you a fucking affidavit from some state court in a case that wasn't even fucking filed, and they'll pretend it's good as gold, okay? They don't give a about the standards for any of this shit. Oh, is it conviction? Was it bad? Well, I don't know. Was my guy convicted or was their guy convicted? Oh, well, when they convict their guys, that Hunter Biden case, that was 100% good that they convicted him. I'm glad. All the Trump ones, though, those are totally phony and bullshit, bogus. Right. The Trump impeachment is bullshit. I can't even believe they would try that. The Biden impeachment is good. I can't believe the House isn't voting on it. It's evidence of corruption. Like, there's no consistency whatsoever. Well, there is. Right. I'm so sorry. I lied because I'm an idiot. There is consistency. The consistency is just if it's on Trump's side, it's always good, and if it supports Trump, it's always good, and if it's against Trump, it's always bad, and if it's not on his side, it's always bad. That's the only consistency. Don't pretend. Don't ever play into the conservative delusion that there's any other type of argument that they're proffering there, because they never are. It's always bullshit. Sorry.
Wow.
No, one of the things that Michael was touching on, and because I don't know, part of me feels like this is going to be one, like a lot of this stuff is one in a decentralized way. Like, don't get me wrong, like your narrative on when you're going after these influencers, these people that have mega platforms, like that's absolutely the way I think you should go for it. I'm thinking of like when I'm talking to like my dad or like a friend of mine, like, you know, they don't really have a deep or rich understanding of all the nuance here, and I feel like if you can kind of put some really clear evidence in front of them and say, look, this is bullshit, the thing that you just watched on TikTok the other day, and here's some court cases that you can look at or some evidence, I think those people could be won over. And that's really what I'm curious for you. I mean, for me, it's like the fake elector scheme, I think, is like the clearest example of Trump trying to subvert the election. But I'm curious as to like, in those types of conversations, do you feel like there's just any piece of information that if you put it in front of somebody that is able to be moved, it's just super clear?
I'm in the influencer world, so I'm like arguing with people online. So my takes are a lot more doomer than what a normal person should be. I'm so sorry. I think that if you can get in front of a person and show them, people like Candace Owens and Tim Pool should legitimately be stripped of their citizenship and deported to a fucking island. I'm not joking. I'm not joking when I say that. Joe Rogan, I'm like 50-50 on, okay? But if you can get enough evidence, and it has to be an abundance of, a lot of evidence in front of a person, and like have an open mind and not be combative, and you're friendly and like you have a whole ass conversation. The problem is it's not the fault necessarily of most conservatives, right? Are you guys both atheists?
Agnostic atheist, yeah.
If you heard God talking to you in your head right now, would you assume that it was really God, or would you assume that you're like going crazy?
Honestly, even if I was a Christian, I would not assume that God was just talking to me.
Yeah, that's like, it's an issue. It's actually a really strong. I'm a big atheist, but it's a really strong challenge to an atheist. It's like, oh, okay, you believe in God, right? It's like, yeah, of course I would if I had some evidence for it. Okay, well, let's say that God comes down, appears in front of you, and talks to you. Do you believe in God now? Well, no, I'd probably assume I'm going insane. Okay, well, what if your friend comes in and he's talking to your friend? I'm like, it's probably more likely that I'm dreaming. That God actually comes out, right? Well, at some point you realize, okay, holy I'm actually so into this like materialist, physicalist, atheist world. I don't know if I actually could ever be shown evidence of God existing. And the issue with conservatives is they built up such an epistemically powerful echo chamber that, like, okay, well, look at these court docs. Well, the courts, they're rigged. Okay, well, what about when, like, the people in Congress, really? Politicians, congressmen? Okay, well, even people like McCarthy, he's a rhino now. We don't trust him anymore. Yeah. Okay, well, what about, like, when even the Supreme Court ruled, the courts, the ones that we even hear, Texas v. Pennsylvania, they didn't even look at the evidence. Trump's already told me that those are corrupt. Okay, well, like, you're like depending on how strong they're in it, like every single evidence piece you show them is always furthering whatever thing they believe in. There's no way to pull them out. You can't show them or do anything. They're trapped, but they are. You can pull them out. You just have to try harder. I'm Doomer. I'm sorry. I'm online. Okay, I deal with.
No. It's good. I understand why you would be in that mindset. I don't blame you for that at all. I'm from the deep south, so I'm surrounded by Trump supporters all the time. I've got some of them in my family, right? So I'm thinking about like how do you make those compelling narratives that can maybe pull those people away. And Mike, you may want to chime in on this. One of the groups that I really appreciate right now is Sarah Longwell from the Bulwark and the work that the Republican Accountability Project is doing, because what they're basically doing is they're giving Republicans like an anti-Trump identity, but they're not forcing them to be Democrats. Mm-hmm. So they're allowing people that off-ramp. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work that they're doing, but I mean, I'm convinced that like they're basically putting out all these ads that are like, hey, I voted for Trump for 3 times, but after January 6th.
3 times.
Or 2 times, sorry, yeah. I voted for him twice. You can vote in a primary. There's my 3 times.
Got him.
But, you know, he's basically giving them an identity, saying, look, January 6th was really bad. They're running these ads in all these swing states. And I think it's really, really important work. And I'm convinced center-right voters, if you peel enough of them away in these swing states, you can win. You can defeat Trumpism at least this time. And
this time,
this time.
And that gets into another question, which is, where do you think our political coalitions go post-Trump? Okay, let's say the election comes, and as God wills it, okay, Kamala wins, Trump's done, bam, like she wins 300 electoral votes. Mm-hmm. Okay. What happens to Trumpism? What happens to the Republican coalition? What happens to the Democratic coalition, you think, over the next couple of cycles?
I mean, the Democratic coalition, I have no idea. I feel like the Democratic Party is actually pretty strong and pretty unified. We're like very big tent. We're all kind of on the same page right now, as long as we have Trump to fight with. There's a lot of fighting that it appears we're more divided than we actually are, but it's just because on Twitter it's like college students and irrelevant dipshits that bought half their viewer base like Hassan anyway, right? These people like seem like they're the voice of the Democratic Party, but they're not. They're just like popular online with people that don't vote. The actual like mainstream like Democratic Party is a huge tent party. You look at the lawmakers in Congress, they're all pretty chill. The Republican Party, I have no idea where the Republican Party goes from here. They have to like completely rediscover themselves, because I don't think that anybody can replace Trump. Right? People like Vivek tried it. People thought maybe DeSantis or we could go back to something more traditional, and that didn't work. So Trump can't be replaced, I don't think, unless like Trump Jr. maybe, but I don't know. I've seen him speak. I don't think he could do it.
I feel like the primary voters have been primed for some sort of populist narrative. And I really don't feel like the old kind of neocon rhetoric is going to come back. Like, I don't think a Nikki Haley makes it through unless there's like a really concerted effort amongst the Republican media to do that. But right now, the red pill content is just so expansive that I don't think they can do it. And so what I think is interesting and maybe gives me a little bit of optimism is I think Republican ideology is extraordinarily malleable because it's all centered around one man. Trump comes out and he's like, I love price controls. Now they love price controls. A week earlier, they're like, Kamala, she wants price controls. This is terrible, right? And it's like,
communism. Yeah.
These guys could literally believe anything. And so, it's totally possible that, yeah, maybe a new Republican candidate comes around and they're talking the populist talk, but their actual policies aren't maybe as corrosive or extreme as Trumpism.
Yeah, it's possible. You just have to find a way to make people reckon with reality. Like, the idea that people are trying to say that Kamala Harris, she should have fixed all these problems as vice president. So therefore, that's why they're attacking her. Meanwhile, Donald Trump was the president with a Republican Congress and a Republican Supreme Court, and he didn't get any of his agenda done. Why the fuck would Republicans even have the gall, have the audacity to try to say that Kamala as the VP should have done this when your own miserable 7 times divorced, 50 times bankrupt, whatever dude, this loser weighs like 400 pounds, okay, without makeup on, another 200 with makeup, right? This is the guy that you're saying can hold Kamala accountable for not single-handedly doing everything as the vice president. When Trump was the president, there was no wall. He failed on the ACA. He didn't control the budget when the economy was booming and roaring. He didn't do anything about what was going on in Crimea with Ukraine. He sat by and he watched as Saudi Arabia got attacked by Iran. Where did this guy succeed at, right? I don't know. That's crazy to me. God, I hate conservatives right now. Sorry. I just absolutely hate them. My bad.
One of the things, though, that actually really concerns me, this is the reason why I feel like this, I really do think this election, for the institutional reasons we talked about, is very existential. But there's also a bigger thing happening that I think is related to the Democratic coalition that also caused me a bit of anxiety. Kamala Harris right now is in the middle of a moderation. Not Kamala Harris. The Democratic Party is kind of moving a little closer to the center. So we talk about what could happen after Trump. But if Trump wins, my concern is that the Democratic Party is going to have basically what's going to happen is the economic populists on the left flank of the Democratic Party are going to say, look, moderation and moving to the center was a failed strategy. And the Democratic Party is then going to kind of rubber band back to the
I don't think, are we really moving to the center or anything? I feel like
I think so. I think so. Because look at Biden's platform and then look at Kamala's. Kamala's platform is now EITC expansion. The CTC expansion is center stage. That's like a pretty centrist policy. We have
wait. How are we defining centrist policy? Giving thousands and thousands of dollars to poor people from government money is a centrist policy? I feel like it's a pretty left-leaning policy, no?
So I think there's economically populist policies, which are kind of like zero sum with how they view things. It's very much like vindictive towards business. And then there's maybe redistributive policies, but this is like a redistributive policy framed as a tax cut. So I think it probably is definitely in the center left space. I think the EITC is like a Bill Clinton thing. And she's talking about cutting taxes for businesses, occupational licensing deregulation, like YIMBY, like building 3 million homes by getting rid of red tape that's obstructing housing development. Do you think that's kind of a move towards the center, maybe from the rent control that Biden was talking about right before he got out?
I don't know. I guess maybe I feel like they're to the left of me right now in economic policies. So
interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I am a full-on Nazi now in terms of econ, but
well, it's not so much that. I mean, of course, it is.
Like we've got like the idea, like the flirting with like the weird wealth tax stuff, like the taxing unrealized gains. Right, You've got this stuff about like. I feel like the child tax credit is stuff. I don't know. To me, that comes as
so the capital gains tax has changed completely. Before it was 44%. That was Biden's plan, and she cut it down to like 30. His corporate tax hike was supposed to go back to the pre-Trump tax cut days. She's taking it back up to like 28. So like she clearly moderated on those positions. And I mean, you remember the 2020 primary?
Well, wait, hold on, wait. Crazy. What do you mean when you say she moderated on positions that were never passed?
No, these were Biden's positions, his campaign's positions.
Yeah, but he never passed any of these, right? We didn't get a 44% capital gains rate. So I don't know, is it counted as moderating if you're coming back, but you haven't even passed any of those policies and it's still to the left of...
Well, but that's what he was promising when he was campaigning against Trump. Mm-hmm. And like she's changed the promise to like a more moderate promise.
I think a more clear example, and I think that like the move away from the higher rates, I think is a good thing. Obviously, I agree with you. Like, I'm not a fan of taxing unrealized capital gains. I think it's lunacy. But I will say, like, one of the things that I think stands like the most clear example was like Kamala and Barack Obama at the DNC talking about how they want to tear down barriers to housing, like talking about deregulation. Embracing narratives around like patriotism and like owning the flag and owning the American identity, like her foreign policy of standing up to Putin and really like leaning into this Reagan-esque rhetoric. I'll agree, it's all rhetoric, but
Right.
it seems to me to be a moderation from the farther extremes. And I mean, Israel's a good example of this too. I mean, she tried to walk that line, right? That's what I look at, and I go, it looks like there's this broad-based shift closer to the center, rather
Okay,
than.
I mean, I guess I just wouldn't view these as like patriotism. I mean, traditionally it was kind of on a left-right paradigm, but I don't know if I would view that as like moderating or being more left or more right or whatever. I don't. Yeah, I'm thinking, I guess, just economics when I think of that.
It seems to me like
I don't know. When I think about the 2020 primary, I think of like a very economically populist time, and the 2020 election, kind of a pretty populist focus of Biden's kind of economic agenda. And over time, I agree with you that like in substance, how much has changed? I think a little bit. I think vibes have changed. She's talking about middle class. Like it sounds very Obama-esque and Clinton-esque.
Well, I mean, keep in mind too that
economy.
when Kamala was running in the primaries, she's running clearly as an option to the left of Biden. Now she's running to assume his presidency basically for the next term. So of course she has to adopt some of the more moderate positions of Biden, right? But even Biden is fairly to the left, right? Like he seems like a guy who he was okay with. Like I feel like I hear protectionist talk around like American jobs a lot. Arguably part of the CHIPS Act was that. Now, I mean, there are also national security concerns as well, for sure.
No, it's tragic. No, it's tragic.
What's tragic?
Stuff that came out. I mean, so many industrial subsidies for. I mean, they call it industrial policy, but it's just subsidies for domestic industries in all kinds of different industries. And there's already tariffs on Chinese imports. And it's like, okay, well, there's one problem, which is getting stuff out of China. That's different than getting everything in the United States. Why can't we trade more with Uruguay? Why can't we trade more with South Africa? Why can't we trade more with plenty of other countries that we don't have free trade agreements with? I mean, we don't even have a free trade agreement with the UK, right? Which is kind of a travesty, in my opinion.
Sure. I mean, I'm just saying I think you can make, they would be national security arguments, so they're not going to be economic arguments, or they might even be economically deleterious, right? Like you can make national security arguments for why we should manufacture processes in the United States while simultaneously acknowledging they're probably going to be more expensive if we do so. I'm just saying it's possible to do it, but yeah.
Right. I think a lot of this is economics. Like I think it's unfortunate Trump shifted the paradigm. And the Electoral College amplifies voters in certain Rust Belt states, which are super important. And we found out that this is a very salient issue for them. And so protectionist rhetoric hits them well, and protectionist policies is popular with them, even though like the basis in economics of like subsidizing every single domestic industry and like tariffing like imports all over the place is not very sound.
Yeah, I mean, economically, I would agree. I'm not a big protectionist. I'm not a big...
Based estimate.
Okay, so... then maybe this could be the last topic we touch on, because it really want to go back to some of just like really lean into this conversation around the kind of the divides on the left. So to put a cap on it, when I did watch the primary debates in 2020, I felt like the Democratic Party was moderating a lot or moving a lot farther to the left. I feel like the vibe shift is seeming like things are moving a little bit closer to the center. We'll see how that plays out policy wise. I think it's a complete, who the fuck knows what's going to happen with that. One of the things, though, that we've talked about is housing. And Mike, I think you wanted to talk a little bit just about the housing issue and talk about how liberals look at it differently than the left.
Right. So we do have a quote for you, and we just wanted to see what your response was to this. The quote is, "If I'm the government, I'm coming in and I'm saying Chinese-style communist takeover, eminent domain, that shit's mine now. We're making this into a permanent shelter. We're taking every single person from Skid Row and every single homeless person, and we're putting them into that fucking luxury high-rise condominium." And that's from a streamer you may know. His name is Hassan Piker. We were wondering what your response would be to that.
I don't. It's not even wrong. It's so. I don't even know what part of it.
It is a common view, nationalizing all housing and like centrally planning and like redistributing it.
Yeah, it was a common view that drinking mercury would cure your disease in the 1700s. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to that. Yeah, it's retarded. Like it's built on this idea. There's this myth that leftists and people on the right perpetuate that there are all of these empty apartments and all of these empty houses, and just rich people buy them and just sit on them to like watch them appreciate in value, and poor people could move into these places and be fine. But this is retarded, and it's not true. And the idea of moving a bunch of crackheads into some apartment and thinking that would fix their problems is also fucking retarded. Dealing with homelessness is a challenging issue that requires like a whole bunch of coordination between different types of services. You know, emergency medical services, addiction counseling, people that help you. A lot of these people need long-term care and support. Like there's just a lot going on there. The idea that it's just, but when your whole worldview is just like rich people, or I'm sorry, for Hassan's worldview, it would be fuck the other rich people. Then obviously you're going to be devoid of any actual argument you're making. Yeah.
It's funny to me how similar the mindset is when you're talking about economic or just populists in general. It's like on the far left, it's like, you know, rich people are to blame for all the problems of society. On the far right, it's like immigrants are to blame for all the problems of society. And at the center of this is this like desire to boil down everything into this one group and pin all the issues on this one group, rather than actually wrestling with the incentives that cause these problems and the actual systems that can lead us to more prosperity. I wanted to ask you this because we have a bunch of people in our audience, Destiny, that consider themselves YIMBYs. Do you consider yourself a YIMBY and part of that movement?
Listen, I'm such a YIMBY, I'm not even a YIMBY, okay? I don't even have a backyard, all right? I go wherever the city builds high density housing is where I go, okay? That's where I am, all right?
Let's go.
You are in Miami too, so they've gone crazy on that high density stuff.
Destiny, YIMBY confirmed. I do have one.
Is that true?
Question.
I don't know of any place. I'm not sure where you're from, if you're in the United States or not. I don't know if you can say any place in the U.S. has gone crazy on high density.
Yeah, maybe not crazy enough.
I live in a high rise, but right across the street are building after building of like, they're condos at least, I guess. Or not condos, I'm sorry, duplexes, or there's like 4 units to a building. But I mean, it could be way more dense.
Austin's doing very well. They got rid of parking mandates. They changed their compatibility standards, up zones, a lot of stuff like that. We've been doing some stuff here in Houston. We do some stuff well. Now, I do have one last question for you. We talked about this earlier. There is this common allegation that liberals are boring, they're centrists, they're moderates, they don't have big solutions. And I think a lot of young people are attracted to kind of extremist ideologies because they promise that things could be way different and way better. What do you think about that? And do you think there's any examples of like really big liberal ideas that we could use to inspire people and attract them to liberalism?
No, you have to do the homework and you have to understand what the is going on. The issue right now is that we're in a society where we have largely solved a lot of simple problems, okay? We typically don't lynch black people. We don't send gay people to conversion therapy. Women are allowed to vote and go to school. Like a lot of the very simple stuff we've more or less solved, or we've made a of progress on. So now the questions that are before us are far more complicated and they require a more complicated answer. You're taking a guy, you know, who's in the year 1920 who weighs 400 pounds and he's expecting an Ozempic when what he needs is 2 years of like diet and exercise. When you talk about fixing problems in like say like the black community, like the answer is going to involve caring for the family so that it's not just like a single mom working 3 jobs. It's going to involve like education at an early age. It's going to involve funding for childcare. It's going to probably involve some nutritional or dietary component. It's probably going to involve some changing of like transportation in the city. Like there are all these things that have to be addressed and people are just looking for like the silver bullet. Like why would I waste all this time on a black kid, you know, when he's 0 to 18 when I could just give him affirmative action when he's 19? Like boom, that should solve everything, right? No, right? It's just all of it, and that's just one of like a million things, you know, whether we're talking climate change or vaccine policy or whatever else. Like everything is very complicated now, and the solutions are equally complicated, and you have to have a good understanding of these things. But when you can just get up there and promise a simple solution to things, yeah, it's way more attractive, and populists are very good at doing that, especially Donald Trump right now. Yeah.
I actually think no, I couldn't agree more. The incentive structure is incredibly complex, and it's like 10 times harder to get people to buy in. But I think there's ways, like from a communications perspective, to like brand complicated policy solutions as something simple and digestible.
Right.
And I actually think the YIMBY movement has done a good job of this, because like YIMBYism as a philosophy is a diverse slew of different policy options, and many of them, you know, even YIMBYs in the movement don't like have full, like they're not all aligned around their ideal solution. But they basically branded it like, oh, we're about building homes, hard stop, and this is how we fix the problem. It's a supply side solution. So that's kind of the way I think is best to approach it.
Right.
Like,
I mean,
really
it's land use regulatory reform. Like, what is a parking mandate? Most people don't know what that is.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm optimistic. I think that I think you're totally right that the truth is complicated, right? The world doesn't come with like some sort of simple ideological solution. But I think there probably is like a simple liberal story you can tell about like individual empowerment and choice, which can be helpful. And I think that you see that sometimes, right? Like I think like people that advocate for basic income, people that advocate for the child tax credit, that is redistribution, but it's redistribution that puts power in your hands. And there's a lot of examples of that. Like you could talk about healthcare, right? In a lot of countries around the world, liberal parties have created healthcare systems that are universal, but you still have choice. And like that's a really, I think, American thing, you know? Like the left talks sometimes
Yeah, but since
about,
conservatives are allowed to live in another reality, like a conservative will shamelessly tell you that those healthcare systems are all broken and don't work. Like they'll just tell you this. They'll just say it.
No, I mean, conservatives, that's by far the most most pressing issue. But I think there's also an issue in like certain blue states where like the ideology is wrong. Like you look at a place like California, they get a lot of things wrong. And I think there's special interest group capture and things like that going on at play. But there's also just the ideology of policymakers where they do think of things in kind of like a maybe like a more paternalistic sense. Like there's these problems of like people's choices and we need to come in and like intervene and control them. And maybe there's like a liberal story we can tell about people are the best authors of their own destiny and the government's role should be to empower them and protect them from one another, which could be effective and lead to a lot of interesting policies like a universal basic income or a means-based basic income or universal healthcare choice and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't disagree at all. You just have to be able to frame it that way that, yeah, generally you're just giving people more options, you're giving people more control. But anytime more government is involved, yeah, people just feel like, oh, it's actually more restrictive. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, it's never that simple. Okay, so then let me just throw, like, to take us out, because I think we're about at the hour. You spend a lot of, this is, again, one of the reasons why I'm a huge fan of your work is you spend a lot of time going to war against illiberalism, going to war against this complete batshit insane ideology of MAGA. And I think it's existential in this moment that people of our political persuasion find a way to crack the code to pull people out of these fringe ideologies and back into normalcy. So I'm curious as to, just in the broad strokes, you touched on this a little bit, but how do you feel like we can get better at doing that? Just in the broad strokes, like anything that you've found that just works or doesn't work?
Treat conservatives like they deserve to be treated. Treat them like children. When they say stupid shit, they need to be called out and held to account for these things, and they can't be allowed to walk out. You shouldn't. There is no reasonable conversation to have with a conservative who won't live in reality, and people shouldn't pretend to do that anymore. Find other people to bring on and have the conversation with. It's just ridiculous. And then if that fails, and we end up splitting, I think I'm also in favor of. I'd vote yes on this. Let's split the country in two, and we'll go 20 years. Okay, all the MAGA dipshits can go to one side, and all the other people can go to the other side, and we'll see in 20 years where we're at, and then whoever's doing better, you get to rule the other country, and the other side loses the ability to vote for a generation. Fuck you. And we'll just do that. We'll see how, when you have people like Alex Jones as the head of your fucking science department, when people like Joe Rogan are the heads of your media and cultural centers, when your Giuliani's and your Sidney Powell's are the heads of your Department of Justice, we'll see what you guys can do. We'll see what you accomplish. We'll see what you get done. And, if your country sucks shit in 20 years, if you end up being a massive fucking drain like all the red states are and the blue states are right now economically, yeah, if you end up being that, then in 20 years you just lose your right to have a fucking say in things, and you just sit down and shut the fuck up and let everybody else try to move the country forward. Because right now it's like trying to drive the fucking Titanic with 7 boat anchors.
I mean, when you look at the metrics from red states, I think you're objectively correct. And RFK, as in charge of like
vaccines,
anything related to health, is a horrifying prospect. Absolutely horrifying prospect. Okay, well, listen, we'll try to moderate.
RFK, that's the guy who is crying recently because he's trying to get his name back on the ballot in states that will hurt Democrats, right? Supporting the same party that was crying about playing games with the ballot before and saying it was anti-democratic, right? Just checking, right? That RFK, that's one you're talking about?
Yep, New York. I just saw that article like a couple days ago.
Gotcha. The guy who had brain worms that died of starvation in his head? I remember that guy. Okay.
the guy who has like 5 different dead animal scandals each week.
The chainsaw of the humpback whale and traumatizing his kids. What a great role model. Stephen, I just want to say thanks for coming on and chatting with us. And, the work that you're doing fighting against some of this stuff on the right is incredibly important in this moment. So, for the sake of our audience, I don't know if there's anything you want to tell them. You've got a way bigger audience than us. But if they want to go do anything, take any action, is there anything they should think about?
Yeah, we're canvassing in Wisconsin. Is the first one we're doing. We might do an event in Pennsylvania after, depending on how this one goes. We'll see, but we're doing an event in Wisconsin. I want to say like in a week and a half or 2 weeks. Somebody link me in chat. Show up. We'll go knock on doors, canvass, get people to vote Democrats, and have a great time.
Woohoo.
And
Rock on. All right. Well, let's hope we can make it past November. I appreciate for our audience listening in on this episode. You can check out more about our project, projectliberal.org. We're building a broad-based, cross-partisan coalition to defend liberal values against authoritarianism in pursuit of a free and open society. Learn more at projectliberal.org and on our mailing list. Micah, thank you for taking time.
Absolutely.
And
thanks so much.
Steven, thanks again, man. Godspeed. I'll see you after November.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
See you guys.
I think I need to stay for a second to make sure that it fully uploads, right?
Yeah, for a split second. It shouldn't be that long. Let's see. 99% uploaded.
You might have to stop the recording. I don't know if you've...
I did stop it,
okay.
So it should just take a second. There we go. And it should be... It's at 99%. Oh, Lord.
All good?
I think we are almost there. It says like 2 megabytes. I'm curious, while I've got you, how did you find us? Did we just pop up in your algorithm?
I think so, yeah. I'll just retweet your shit. Because I like supporting liberals because they don't exist on the internet anywhere. So.
I think one of our most viral memes was the one that we put out. I just like one of our top 3 most viral memes was the one that we put out around like being a free speech absolutist, and then your jokes after the assassination attempt, and that thing went mega viral.
Oh yeah, I got a lot of pushback for that one. Yeah.
Yeah, I get your logic. So I tell many people on my team, it's like these people are absolutely disconnected with reality, and they talk about trying to like moderate the discourse and trying to bring down the tone. Meanwhile, they're out there literally ramping it up every second. It's complete hypocrisy. Complete hypocrisy.
Cool. Yeah. Anyway, if you can, if you have any connections to anybody that does like criminal investigations or people that are just really good researchers in general, could you pass them my way? I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks desperately trying to find all of the conservatives that I'm sure are outraged about the fact that there was a suppression of a story about J.D. Vance on Twitter, because remember, the suppression of the Hunter laptop story was literally the worst thing that ever happened in the history. So I'm going to spend the next 2 weeks looking for those conservatives that are equally outraged about the J.D. Vance suppression. By the way, J.D. Vance, who's an actual candidate who's part of that ticket, and not Hunter Biden, who's just, the crackhead son of a guy running for president. So, yeah, I'm going to be looking for those conservatives for a while. Yeah.
I will absolutely send you tips on that. That is absolutely bad shit. I've seen 3 or 4 people today get blocked out of their account or completely banned. I mean, obviously we know that Ken was banned, but like I've seen 3 or 4 people getting locked out of their accounts for sharing screenshots of the document.
Jesus.
Of the document. Like Eric Bohm from Reason took a screenshot and posted an hour or 2 ago, and he was banned. He was locked out of his account for doing that. It's absolutely insane.
Me, I didn't even know Elon had tweeted about this. Are you fucking serious? Wow, it's hack. We're doing a hacked materials doxing policy. Good one. I hope 2 more of his kids turn trans because of this one. I hope he does. Good for you, Elon. God, I fucking. Okay. All right. I'm gonna go be a liberal. Yeah. Have fun.
Do your thing. Thanks, Steven.
Bye.
Bye-bye.